So when Phyllis first approached me about doing another Women on Wednesdays, because I was here with Moms Demand Action not too long ago, I thought, okay, well, what do you want me to talk about? And she said, whatever you do, And I thought, well, what do I do? So I teach human services. I have private practice, all of these things that she mentioned before. I do research on families. I do research on siblings, specifically within families. But I also have done research on the LGBT population and women that serve in the military. And I've also done research on co-parenting. And I've also done research on, our reaction to racial strife at the university setting. So I feel like I'm kind of all over the place. And I thought, what do these things have in common? I teach counseling, theory and practice, I teach advanced developmental psych, I teach child, family, and community. And the thing that kind of ties everything together is resilience. So I research and I teach and I practice resilience. And so when you saw the email that first came out, it probably said the practice and research of resilience, but I'm actually going to do it the other way around. I'm going to talk about the research first, and then I'm going to talk about the practice, because I think it's probably good to end on a good positive self-care note. So when I first started talking about healing and resilience, I was doing family life education with substance abusers and people who had been mandated to come and see me through the court system in Louisiana. And this presented a really unique opportunity because I got to work with teenagers for a lot of these cases and young adults, and who really believed like there was no way out of this particular cycle. And I used the analogy of the smoker's lung. So this is something that you probably saw in your health class, right? This idea that, the smoker's lung looks black and tarred and has all of this damage, but in 10 years, it can look like a healthy lung again if that person stops smoking, right? So changes in lifestyle, changes in their behaviors can actually promote healing in the body. And the body's an amazing, amazing organism. It can actually do this. It can heal. And our brain is the exact same way. It finds ways to heal. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it takes a short amount of time. Sometimes it involves other people, our family support, our community, our context to change, right? But it can do it. And this idea of healing often brings a lot of hope to people. And so I try to convey that in everything that I do, and I try to convey that to my students who will go out and work for community agencies as well. They need to bring that spirit of resilience, that spirit of healing, and that spirit of hope. I wanted to start kind of with this because, again, I want you to have an analogy, a picture in your head of how this looks. So my first attempt to study resilient people was a study on co-parenting. So, not to date myself, but divorce was a hot topic back then, and it was still stigmatized. And, I was a young therapist. I was teaching Psychology 101. I was, a domestic relations mediator for the state of Indiana. I had all of these things that were showing me people who were going through the process of divorce or had children who were divorced that really were good people, that had good success in life. And they weren't necessarily stigmatized by this divorce. And, my students openly talked about their parents' divorce in class. My good students were talking about their parents' divorce in class. And so, having looked at all of this research, Wallerstein and Amato and all of these people that talked about the negative effects of divorce, it got me kind of questioning this idea because, again, here were my successful students, my A students, products of divorce, talking about their parents' divorce openly, right? So I thought, okay, so what makes them get to college? What makes them do well in college? How is it that they're academically successful if they had these horrible repercussions from the divorce? Like, what makes that happen? What makes them resilient to this type of adversity? And so I built a model. So this was my first model. For those of you who can't see the tiny writing, distance and financial stability would predict time spent with the child, parent participation in the child's activities, parental decision-making for the child, decreased conflict with the other parent, and all of that would predict academic success. That's what I thought was going to happen. So I was teaching Psych 101. We passed out surveys to the Psych 101 students because at Purdue you're mandated to take a research component to your classes, so you have to participate in some sort of research. So we have a nice pool of people. And I found this. So we did path analysis, ran a structural equation modeling, some structural equation modeling, and we found that yes, distance did influence time, and financial stability did influence whether or not that non-custodial parent participated in decision-making, and finances also influence decreased conflict in the home, or between the houses, I should say, and that participation in the child's activities influenced academic success. But it also told me that my model was not a good fit for the data. And I was like, all right, well, okay. So we did some post hoc tests, and thankfully the Lagrange multiplier told me to do this. It was a lot more complex than I thought. So basically what it told me to do was to add direct lines to each one of the 4 intermediaries, and then a direct line all the way to academic success from both finances and distance. So I added those extra paths, and it was a much better fit for the data. So I think some of the key things that we got from this is that finances seem to be really important. And financial stability is that one piece that really was significant for a large majority of our data set. That was a component that helped them have, one, decreased conflict with the other parent and between the parents, and again, academic success. And it made sense. This is the one component that family courts across the country actually enforce, right? That they're pretty adamant about. They'll go and collect someone's child support payments from their paycheck, right? They won't force them to spend time with that child, but they will force them to pay up, right? So it was very much in line with all of those things. But I also made a few mistakes along the line. I didn't ask gender. And that was influential in my research for the rest of my life, right? I didn't ask gender, and so I didn't know whether this was more true for men or more true for women. And I also asked about siblings. I asked them how many siblings they had, but I didn't actually ask them about the number of siblings or the gender of the siblings or any of those things. And again, that had an impact on how I was going to pursue research later on. So that was my first attempt to study a resilient population. So I moved on for my dissertation. As a young PhD student, I was haunted by these things. And I read this paper on adultification of siblings. And this is Linda Burton's 2007 model. This is her conceptualization of adultification of children because of her ethnographies that she's done throughout the years. Now, Linda Burton is at Duke University. She's a sociologist by trade. And she has this theoretical model. Beautiful, right? And we'll get to overachieving here later. But she had this model that hadn't been tested. And I thought, great, I'm going to test the model. Now, it was a little ambitious. And thankfully, my dissertation committee trimmed it down a little bit. So I just tested some components of this model. But adultification, just to give you a little bit of information about adultification, and we'll come back to this slide. Adultification takes 4 different forms. One is precocious knowledge. So this idea that children are exposed to things that is adult knowledge, adult content, that they shouldn't really be exposed to. This kind of comes in a couple of different ways. One could be that like mom is telling them about dating information or her relationships, or dad is telling them about financial issues that he might be having. It might be that they're the ones that go out to the mailbox and collect the welfare check and go deposit it at the bank because they know how to use the ATM. So knowledge that, again, they're not supposed to have any sort of, exposure to. And then we have mentored adultification. Mentored adultification is what we would term a little bit more positive. That's when someone is actually looking after that child, helping them to perform adult activities, kind of watching them perform these adult activities, maybe helping them open a bank account by themselves, or maybe helping them get a job, those types of activities. Then we have purification or spousification, and that is usually when one parent treats that child as the best friend. That parent treats that child as if they are their spouse. So they're the ones that get all the worry, they're the ones that get all the talking to, they're the ones that have to help that other parent do the work. And I will add the caveat that we see this both in two-parent families and in single-parent families. This is not a unique to single-parent families, although it's studied more often in single-parent families. And the last one there is parentification. And parentification is when effectively the parent and the child switch roles. So the child is waking up the mom or the dad in the morning to get him off to school, to work, making sure that the other siblings are, getting fed every day, doing the dishes, doing the house cleaning, all of those types of things. So effectively, they've switched roles. Usually, we see parentification most in substance-abusing families. So usually, one of the children takes the responsibility for that parent and starts to do those things. Now, again, the literature is negative in a lot of respects for this, but there's also some positive things that come out of adultification. This idea that you start to take on adult roles is not necessarily a bad thing. The forms and features, whether it's an emotional task or an instrumental task, makes a difference. Whether or not it's temporary or you're doing it all the time makes a difference. How long you're doing it for makes a difference, right? You might be that parent until you go off to college, for example. And then role boundaries and clarity. And I'll talk about this a little bit more, but for example, in families with disability, we don't see these same types of adultification. So I wanted to know just a few things about some of these things, because we were going to test it quantitatively. And again, we didn't want to get too extreme. I already had 37 hypotheses, and they were like, okay, you need to stop, right? Again, we'll get to overachieving later. So the family context things that I thought were important were first, parental time, how much time that parent actually spends with the child, family size. So I had this theory that, again, the bigger the family, the more likely one of those children was going to have to step up and change diapers and make dinner and help around the house and maybe get a job and help with finances, those types of activities. Parental physical and mental health. So is that parent physically able to take care of the family? Do they have the psychological capacities to take care of that family? Parenting skills. Some people have the psychological capacity, but not the parenting skill to do it, right? Family structure, family poverty, neighborhood factors, family closeness. Again, this idea that if you were a tight-knit family unit, you would be more likely to do these things as well. Parental immigrant status. Now, this one's personal. So one of the things that resonated with me when I was reading these articles was that I was a cultural broker for my family. So I was the one that translated for my mom, who still to this day does not speak English. She can if she has to, but generally speaking, she's like, here, read this. What does it say? Right? So I was adultified because I had to read the letters home for my siblings and myself. I had to help them with taxes. I had to do all of these things that probably an 11-year-old, 10-year-old wouldn't normally have to do in a family. But again, my parents were from another country and they didn't speak the language, and so I had to kind of step into that role. And again, language spoken in the home being the other ones. But then you also have this other piece to that, and that is, who is that child? I was the middle child. I was not the oldest child. But typically, birth order is one of those huge things, right? The oldest child is the one that takes care of the younger siblings. So birth order, physical disability, right? There has to be an absence of physical disability for that child to be selected to be adultified. Psychological availability, right? They have to have the right mindset to be able to do that. Autonomous decision making. They have to be able to make some choices on their own in the absence of that parent. Trustworthiness, religiosity, ability to do housework, and employment. So I'm going to go through my findings kind of quick. But what we found is that parental disability, so the parental disability, family closeness, and parenting skill were the biggest influences. Now, parental disability didn't go the way that we thought it was going to go. So I had to look it up because now I have to defend this, right? So parental disability, the literature pretty much says that when a parent is disabled, the children and the parents are real clear about those boundaries. The parent is the parent. And they don't have as much adultification in these families because, again, the parent is the parent. And I think, again, it's compensating for something when a parent is disabled, that this child is going to make sure, and the parent is going to make sure that those roles are clear, right? But again, family closeness and parenting skill. The lacking of parenting skill obviously was the big one that led to adultification. Interestingly, family structure was one of those that was moderated by gender. So if you were in a two-parent family, you were more likely to be a boy who was adultified or asked to take on adult roles. I should add here that I looked at AdHealth, the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent Health, and they're up to wave 5, I believe. They started in 1994-95 with middle school and high school students. They tracked them, or still are tracking them, I should say. Started off with about 15,000 that they did across the country. In my particular sample, because I was using wave 1 and wave 3, I had about 4,000 in my sample at that particular time. Again, not to date myself, but they are up to wave 5. That data collection will end in 2018. So I can actually do this again and see if there was any changes or test the back end of that model, which we'll get to. So again, in a non-single parent family, so either a two-parent family or a blended family, they actually were more likely to be adultified if they were boys. And if they were in a single-parent family, they were more likely to be adultified if they were girls. So I thought this was kind of odd. And the literature usually swings over here. It's usually biased toward what they call little mamas, or the one older child, usually that takes care of the kids and feeds them and makes sure that mom gets off in the morning and all of those things, right? So we've already seen that the literature was biased in this way. So this one was coming out of left field for me. I thought, okay, boys from two-parent families? Like, why are they reporting being adultified? So the other one that kind of threw me here was adultification by family structure was also modified by feeling safe in their neighborhood. So the white one is that they do not feel safe in their neighborhood, and the striped one is that they do feel safe in their neighborhood. So if they were in a two-parent family and they did feel a little unsafe in their neighborhood, they were likely to report adultification. And if they were in a single-parent family and they did not feel safe in their neighborhood, they were more likely to report adultification. Did I say that right? Okay. So again, it was interesting to me that if they felt safe, if they did not feel safe in their neighborhood, they were adultified. So they were asked to step into roles, again, to do what? Keep them busy, maybe? Keep them doing something for their siblings or keep them close to the family. Again, I had all these other variables that I knew were going to be taking place, like family closeness, right, that predicted these things. So there was something else that was happening there. The adolescent attributes themselves, most of these came out pretty significant. The ones that were kind of surprising, we know that religiosity and birth order were probably going to be significant, but the ones that really kind of threw me was boys, specifically boys, that were not trustworthy and did not participate in housework were more likely to report that they were adultified. Why might that be happening? Why might a boy, a teenage boy, that was not considered trustworthy and, lazy, as reported by the parents, be considered, or consider himself to be adultified or being asked to perform adult tasks as a teenager? Anyone have a guess? If your mom thought you were lazy, what would she do? Yeah, she'd make you a list of chores, right? If they didn't think you were trustworthy, I think they would probably try to keep you at home, right? So I think perception has a lot to do with some of these findings as well. These are self-reported teenagers, and that they get the interviews, and they also get the reports of the parents. So I think that, comparing the two was interesting, because again, you could see that the parents were saying, no, like he does no housework whatsoever, and I don't trust him to go out with his siblings, like, no. So and he's like, yeah, she gives me all of this work, I don't know what's going on, right? So I think that it's a mechanism by which they were trying to keep these kids at home. Jay Mancini said at a conference here recently that if your glass is half empty, then it is also half full. And in adversity, that half full is capacity. And I think what this is saying is that those parents were trying to work that capacity angle. They were trying to see their kids as having things, being capable of doing things, and trying to push their children in that particular direction. All right, so back to my model. So where am I now? I gave you my findings from my dissertation. And now I'm more interested in this back end. So before I was over here, and now we're getting to over here. So studying resilience now. So if you read through some of these assets and liabilities, self-confidence, responsible behaviors, sense of mattering in the family, life skills and problem-solving competence, heightened social awareness, empathy, capable leadership, right? Those are my students. Those are my counseling and human service students. Like, it's a lot of people in the caregiving professions. Police officers, teachers, right? All of those people that take on this leadership role that has empathy, that has heightened social awareness, that is responsible, that, is trying to take care of other people. But you notice the second half of that is that it's also a liability, right? It can lead to narcissism. It can lead to compulsive caregiving, right? Which describes a lot of those people as well. It can lead to an attenuated capacity for intimacy and romantic relationships, right? It can lead to hypervigilance, risky sexual behaviors. So because now we're tracking these people as adults, we can start looking for some of these things in the people that said they were adultified. Now, using the AdHealth data is a little limited because, again, we have only about 3 questions in there that ask them about the adult roles that they served in. But we were able to make a scale. It has a strong enough Cronbach alpha that we can test it. But, we don't have duration. We don't have, some of the features of it, right? We don't know for how long they did it, for example. But we can see that if they reported it, whether or not they have some of these assets or liabilities on the back end. So that's kind of where I'm going, right? That's how I'm going to be testing the resilience of these kids later on, right? So enter Audrey Wilson-Besch over here, my GA. And she says, hey, I would like to study the psychological manifestations of adults with dyslexia. And I said, hey, that's kind of interesting. She wants to know about overcompensation, whether or not overachievement is one of those ways that they compensate for having dyslexia. And I said, well, who thinks they're overachievers? Could be siblings. Could be a family perception that they are overachievers. I know my siblings will probably tell you about that about me, right? So if someone has dyslexia and, do they perceive themselves as being an overachiever? Did their family think that they were overachievers? Did that affect the relationship within that family? Right? Did it affect the adult relationship with those siblings? So this is how we're studying it today. And we got IRB approval yesterday, and so we're going to start data collection. And she is scheduled to present the results of these findings at the Aging in America conference in San Francisco in March. So that's kind of where we're going. All right, so that was the research. So you can see that studying resilience and studying resilient individuals can get pretty complex pretty fast. Thankfully, the practice of it is a little bit easier, right? Because we've all had moments of resiliency. And we will all be able to pull some sort of hope or sense of healing from the experiences that we've already had in our own lives, right? But in teaching my students, I have to be able to make sure that when they work with families, they are doing it in the best possible light. So I am also a trauma-informed care trainer, right? I'm part of the Johnson City trauma-informed system of care. And one of the things that I do in my classes is I try to help them to learn to speak to people who have been traumatized and make sure that when they do talk to them, that they are, again, presenting themselves in a way that helps that particular family. The other thing that I think is important is this idea from a Walsh that we can work within a particular framework, right? So practitioners must work within the family's belief system, which includes making meaning of their adversity, having hope, and a positive outlook, and understanding transcendence and spirituality of the family. So do you know what that family believes? What do they believe about their situation? How do they understand their situation? Do they understand their situation? Do they believe their situation is going to change, right? Knowing that on the front end helps you be able to shape their resources, their context, your conversations with them, and it's a good starting point for you. If they are a hopeless family, guess what you're going to be doing? Right? You're going to be building hope for them. That's going to be one of your first tasks. So again, knowing what they believe is going to be your first step. The practitioner must understand the family's organizational patterns, understanding the family's flexibility and capacity to adapt and change, to respect individual differences, learn about the family's connectedness, understand the leadership of the family, as well as assessing and mobilizing social and economic resources for them. So who's in charge? And again, I'll take you back to that adolescent again. They might come in to that community agency saying, okay, well, here's mom and dad, and here's us, but mom and dad both work, and so who gets the kids off in the morning? Oh, well, that's Jill, the eldest sibling. She gets everybody off in the morning. She picks everybody up from school, and they walk home together. She cooks dinner, So your in is going to be Jill, right? Because really, she's the one that's doing a lot of stuff for the parents. Now, you might have to do some restructuring of the family as well to make sure that the parents have some leadership roles within that family, but the one that's going to have the most influence is going to be Jill, right? I will also say with this, you need to make sure that there isn't an outside influence to that family that is not in the room. So, for example, grandma. She didn't come with, because you didn't invite grandma to come with, right? But grandma watches everybody after school. Grandma tells mom what to do. Anytime there's any problems with anything, finances, they don't have enough money for rent, whatever, they go to grandma, right? So grandma might need to be brought to the table, if not physically, then at least in conversation, right? So again, knowing how the family is organized, who's in charge, who's leading the family, who's influential in that family is going to be really important. Practitioners must provide clear, open, empathetic, and pleasurable communication, and practitioners must collaborate on problem solving with the family. So first, open, honest communication. I do not know everything. And I'm going to be culturally competent in how I talk to this family by taking a one-down position. So just being curious. Tell me about your family. Tell me about, what it means to be Asian in this community. I can tell you what I've read, but you guys tell me what that means for you guys. And you could bring up some of the things that you might have read about that and say, do you practice that in your family? Right? Is that something that you do? Just being curious and taking that one down position goes a long way in being open and honest with this particular family. If you come off as a know-it-all who thinks they know, they're going to shut down, right? I often show the Brene Brown, I didn't include it in this particular talk, but I often show the Brene Brown empathy video, which has been shown I don't know how many times in just about everything I've ever gone to here in the last year. But I always say to my students that they should not offer their clients a sandwich, right? They shouldn't silver line everything. They need to be able to be empathetic and be like, I'm so glad that you told me this, and I'm here to help if I can, right? It's not about, being like, well, here's the number to the substance abuse clinic, and here's the number to, Child Protective Services, and here's a shelter if you feel in danger, and here's this. And I'm like, no, you're giving them a sandwich. Stop it, right? We practice active listening in our classes. We want them to be able to have a conversation with a family and reflect back what they're hearing. Because that, again, shows that you're participating in the conversation in a way that is meaningful to that family, right? We want them to have that particular one down and, again, being empathetic with that family and hearing what it is that they're saying. All right, the person working with this family should take a proactive stance to prevent problems, avert crisis, and prepare the family for future challenges. So one thing about human service professionals is that they're usually a case manager, a frontline worker, something of that nature. And they're not really going to be the one doing extensive trauma work with this person. So we try to get them to try to take a stance of, okay, how can we get you the resources that you need and prevent bad things from happening again? So more of a preventative measure, right? If you can keep them in a safe context and provide them some of the things that they need, we do want you to give them sandwiches in that sense, but again, it's after you've gotten to know them and understand them and done a needs assessment with them, right, about what they think they need. Because they may not be ready for you to hand them the homeless shelter flyer, right? And again, if you take that proactive stance, you can say to them, well, let's talk about some of the things that you brought up as your concerns, and how can we make sure that it's not a concern for you in the future, right? And it might not happen in one day, it might not happen in 2 days, it might not happen in 3 days. It might not happen in 2 or 3 weeks. But again, just allowing them the space to be able to say that to you, I think is really important. All right. So in order to do all of this work, you have to be able to believe in resilience. You have to believe that people are capable of change, they are capable of bouncing back, and they're capable of healing. And that's really an important thing. And some of my students come into the classroom not knowing this about themselves, right? There's a running joke in marriage and family therapy that we all get into the field to fix ourselves or to fix our families, right? And they address that. They make you actually go to therapy and do some of the work on yourself because they don't want you to be blindsided, right? So for example, if you're sitting there with a mother that's controlling or what have you, they don't want you to be mean to her because what you are really sensing is that it's your mother, right? So you don't want to be blindsided. So you have to deal with some of those issues on the front end. So I have a little activity for you. And I have handouts out here if you want to take one with you. This is actually Stacey Rexerberger's. DrStacey.com is her website. And she is a beautiful transgender woman. And she speaks to otherness. And I thought this was a fabulous activity when I found it. And I've asked her to use it. She's like, yeah, you can totally use it. I want other people to use it. And so again, I brought some printouts if you wanted to take it with you. But it goes something like this. How are you resilient? The first time I was blank years old. The situation was blank. and I learned to take care of myself by blank. So I'm sitting in this room at a conference, and I'm like, I don't know, like, how am I othered? I could put woman in there, I could put Mexican in there, I could put, intelligent in there. I could put any number of things in this slot, right? And she got up and she gave her example, and her example was the fact that she had money, which I just told you she was a beautiful transgender woman, and I didn't understand why she was not using that as an example. But the point of this, the activity is not to point out your most obvious thing, but to really think about how you take care of you, right? So, to give you my example, the first time I realized I was dark or brown, I was 5 years old. The situation was, I realized why my mom was calling me negrita, which translates to little black girl, right? My siblings are both fair-complected, they've got straight hair, they've got hazel eyes, and I was different, right? I learned to take care of myself by being pretty in other ways. My siblings know that they are good-looking. They are not humble. They are not kind, right? Once in a while, we can get it out of them, but I mean, generally speaking, they know they're pretty, and it's really kind of annoying. So I had to find other ways to be pretty. I had to find other ways to get attention from my mother, and I had to find ways to make sure that I still had a good self-esteem, despite the fact that to this day, she still calls me negrita, right? I had to not be offended by that. I had to know that she meant it in a loving spirit, and she wasn't trying to be, diminish me. She was just trying to point out my difference, right? So I want you to try this for yourself. You don't have to write this down. Just in your own head, think about how you would fill in these blanks. The first time I realized I was blank, I was blank years old. The situation was, what was your situation? What was going on around you? Who was with you? What were they saying to you? How were you feeling when that was happening to you? I learned to take care of myself by, what did you do to make yourself feel better? What did you do to overcome those things? You are resilient too. You have overcome a lot of things in your life, and you can carry that forward. It's kind of what I do in my career, and it's kind of what I wanted to share with you today. It's hard to research. It gets really complicated really fast, but it's worth it. So that's kind of my spiel, and I'll open it up to questions if you have any. You have a list of references too.
I have more of a comment than a question.
Okay.
If you go back to the last slide, I'm not going to share my situation, but I learned to take care of myself, and I laughed, and Joyce rubbed my shoulder because I learned to take care of myself by becoming a human service professional. So I actually just was going to say, is it really a joke? Or do we really enter this field because we're trying to fix ourselves? That's kind of it was kind of a funny joke. It's not, because if you say it's a running joke,
yeah.
Kind of like,
It's more like a running commentary than it is a running joke.
It's kind of like the truth. I thought that was interesting because without even thinking about that, that was the first thing that came to mind was like how we can create some sense of identity or resilience in the career path that we choose. Not that it has to be human services or counseling, but we can have some sense of identity and independence and the passions that we choose to pursue.
Absolutely.
So.
I think you will find that like of police officers as well, and military personnel. So another one of my many things that I do is that I work, I'm a therapist in Jonesboro, and I work primarily as a choice provider for the VA. And so I have a lot of veteran clients. And I like to ask them why they joined the military. And usually it has something to do with wanting to protect people, having a sense of wanting to do something bigger than themselves or be part of something bigger than themselves, right? My police officers work a little bit differently. Usually that might be, they might have a military background, but this idea of protecting, right? You know, sometimes they weren't able to protect somebody in childhood, or they saw somebody that wasn't protected in childhood, and it affected them. And so later on, they go into that field with that same mindset that they want to protect somebody, right? They have that resolve because of what they've experienced. Go ahead.
Heidi's not in here. I think she walked out to give someone her chair. But we were talking before work this morning about your talk, and she said, "Well, I have a question already, and I'm going to try to phrase her question because this is what we were talking about. Resilience is hard.
Mm-hmm.
We find it hard, and I wonder if you would talk a little bit about how to navigate that difficulty."
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay, so one of the things that I've learned is that I don't have to be strong all the time. So if something hits me emotionally, I'm a crier. And if you're crying in my office, I'm crying with you. Like, I'm Dolly Parton. You know, no one cries alone in my presence, right? Like, that's just kind of the way it goes, right? You have to be able to know what you can handle. And if you can't, if there's something that you can't help a family with, or there's something that you feel is outside of your scope, you have to be able to say, you know what? I don't know the answer to that, but I will find out the answer to that, or I will get someone to help you that might know the answer to that question, right? So part of it is that you accept that it's hard. The work that we do is hard, right? We hear things that are just absolutely horrible. I used to be a therapist for crime victims assistance when I was in Louisiana, and I worked specifically with children who were aged 7 to 17, who had been victims of rape, incest, emotional and physical abuse. And because they're minors, I have to work with their parents too. And that was really, really hard work, right? I heard things that I don't ever want to take with me. And you have to do a little bit of self-care for that, right? So as soon as I left one of these kids' homes, because it was in-home therapy, I went to the gym. Let me tell you, I worked that stuff off. You know, probably the best shape I've ever been in my life, right? But I had to burn some of that stuff off. I had done yoga prior to that, and yoga wasn't enough when I started working with these crime victims. It wasn't enough. I had to do something else to burn off some of the anger and some of the, rage and hate and things that I was feeling. So it's not easy work. It's not. But I think, again, once you have that self-recognition about yourself, that, okay, I might need something to get through this. And again, it's okay to say that. It's okay to say to them, I'm having a little difficulty just listening to you, and I don't want you to be uncomfortable that I'm fidgeting in my chair, but this is really hard stuff to hear. I'm really sorry that happened to you. I'm really sorry that you're going through this, right? And again, it's that empathy piece. If you show no emotion whatsoever, when someone's in front of you, if you're like, oh, really? You were raped? Oh, okay. And then what happened, right? They're not going to tell you anything, right? You have to be human. And you have to, again, know that just like they heal, you're going to heal too, right? You don't stop just because they're telling you something awful, right? In a lot of ways, it helps make you a little bit stronger, because then you have this last sentence that you get to fill in for yourself after you've dealt with something that's more difficult. So. Any other questions?
Are there any other strategies you use besides yoga, gym, articulating that it's difficult and that there's anger? Are there any other strategies you would
Yes.
share?
So one of the best pieces of advice I ever got early on was seek supervision, right? So there are times when I need to reach out to a colleague. I'm not supervised anymore. Obviously, it's been a long time. But if I am having difficulty with something, conceptualizing something, or having more anger than I usually would, and exercising is not helping, or writing something down isn't helping, I'll talk to somebody. Again, that's kind of what we train our students to do, right? You stay within your scope of practice, and if you can't do that, you seek supervision. Talk to somebody about what it is that you're experiencing. It's amazing how, and again, this is my marriage and family therapy bias, right? It's amazing how much talking to somebody and getting it out, saying it out loud, helps you to work through that. So I'm also a solution-focused therapist. So I believe that everyone has the solutions to their own problems. It's just a matter of, finding what makes you better. So every time someone comes into my office, I'm hoping that they're a little bit better than the last time that they were in my office. And we measure that on a scale. And, it's a very minimalist technique. But again, it's, okay, where are you today? And I have clients that'll walk in and be like, don't ask me, I'm a 5 today. I'm a 5. Right? And I'm like, okay, so what can we do in this session to get you to be a 5.5? Just move up a little bit. Right? And sometimes it's just like, okay, I just need to tell you what happened in my day today. Right? Because they don't need me to fix it. They know what they need to do, generally speaking, to make the situation better, even if it's just a little bit better. Right? I think we all kind of have that capacity. And again, that's my theoretical background that teaches me that. I'm not the kind of person that will talk about your past forever. If they bring it up, great. You want to talk about your past or what happened with your mom? Let's talk about it. Is it helping to talk about it, or is it not helping? Because if it's not helping, we'll stop right now, right? And we'll move forward. But again, it's trying to get them to the solutions to what it is that they're coming in for. So. Any other questions? All right. Well, Audrey is starting data collection, and I put the flyer out here if you know someone that has dyslexia that would like to participate in our 15-minute survey. They can take that with. I'm also teaching mental health first aid in January on the 27th for professional development. Mental health first aid is much like CPR in that it's one day you go in for the training, and then I teach you how to deal with someone who might be having like an anxiety attack or some sort of psychotic episode, right? So in that, it's an 8-hour class. It is $89. It's through the Office of Professional Development. If you work for the university, you can audit the class. If you have any other questions, just let me know.